you to the 4th Dr. PK Mohan Oration, organized by the Department of Neurology, Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute for Medical Sciences and Technology, Thiruvananthapuram, and the Sri Chitra Alumni Association of Neurology. We invite all the members of the SETI-MST Alumni Association, distinguished faculty, and the audience who are joining us online for the function. The Dr. PK Mohan Oration is held every 2 years at SETI-MST, starting from 2014, to commemorate the tireless efforts and dedication of our esteemed founder and erstwhile head of the Department of Neurology, who was instrumental in building up the neurology department. Professor PK Mohan had offered commendable services to the institute, and he was most admired and respected by all his students and colleagues. In the preceding orations, we've been honored by the presence of the stalwarts of neurology, including Dr. Lars Torbjörn Thomson of Karolinska Institute, Sweden, Dr. Cynthia Harden of Mount Sinai Hospital, New York, and Dr. Peter Sandercock of the University of Edinburgh, UK. Before we begin the function, I request all our dignitaries and the audience to observe a minute of silence as a prayer to the Almighty. May I now kindly invite Dr. Sanjeev V. Thomas, Professor, Senior Grade, Head, Department of Neurology, SETI-MST, and President of Sri Chitra Alumni Association of Neurology, to give the welcome address.
Respected Director of the Institute, Dr. Ajit Kumar, distinguished orator for this PK Mohan Oration, Professor Ronald Petersen, my dear colleagues and friends. It's indeed a great honor to address all of you during the 4th PK Mohan Oration. Dr. Mohan had left the institute in 1992. And why is it that we are holding orations in his name even after several years? He had laid the foundation for the department, and he was the teacher to many of us. Probably the last in the institute, maybe me, which I will be also soon leaving the institute. So there's a long legacy that is continuing. His influence on the institute will definitely be continuing in the coming years too. This oration is a platform for everyone to meet, and it is a link between the past and the future. The orations are done biennially, and the orators and the topics are selected based on the contemporary importance. I have great pleasure in inviting our dear director, Dr. Ajit Kumar, to preside over this meeting. He has a long career here. He is a professor of cardiology, an advanced training in interventional cardiology in India and abroad. And he has a keen interest in other departments besides cardiology. He has a warm relationship with all of us in the Department of Neurology. And his presence as the director had been a great strength and encouragement for all of us. And we welcome you, sir, for this meeting to preside over this oration. When we considered who should be the next orator and what should be the topic, there was not much to discuss, as Dr. Ram had suggested Professor Ronald Petersen's name. And of course, there were nothing more to ask or nothing more to inquire. He has an illustrious career. He is presently the professor of neurology and the director of Mayo Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. His academic contributions have been amazing, with over several hundred papers and citations going more than 138,000 and H index of 167. He's really a role model for any researcher who wants to accomplish great things. His contributions in the cognitive neurosciences was in the characterization and coining of the term mild cognitive impairment to distinguish it from established dementia. Today, we are fortunate to have Professor Petersen to give this oration. Thank you very much, Professor Petersen, for readily agreeing to this, our invitation, and taking the effort to come and do the presentation. We welcome you as the orator for this PK Mohan Oration today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas. This is indeed an honor, and I'm only sorry I can't be there in person. With the current environment, virtual presentation is the best we can do. But I greatly appreciate this. It truly is an honor to give a lecture in the honor of Professor Mohan, who established and led your department and the Institute over the years. So I want to express my appreciation to you, Professor Kumar, Professor Menon, for this kind invitation and honor. Thank you.
Thank you. We have several other dignitaries attending this oration. We have senior faculty and department head in the past who are listening to this meeting. We have contemporaries of Dr. PK Mohan in the other departments who are also attending. Dr. Anup Ranjan Verma, one of his illustrious residents, will be remembering Dr. Mohan in this oration meeting. Dr. Mohan's family members, Dr. Manjula Mohan, his wife, his daughter, son, and other family members are attending this meeting. The faculty in the Department of Neurology and other faculty in the Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute are attending this meeting. We have an array of alumni in the Department of Neurology who are also attending this program. My colleagues and friends are there. The administrative staff are behind it. I wish to welcome each one of you to this oration meeting. Thank you. With these words, I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I kindly invite our Honorable Director of SETI-MST, Professor Dr. Ajit Kumar VK, to deliver the presidential address.
Good afternoon, everybody. Respected Professor Ronald Petersen of Mayo Clinic, Dr. Anup Ranjan Verma, Professor Sanjeev Thomas, Professor Shailaja PN, Dr. Ramshekhar Menon, members of the faculty, students, and my dear friends. I deem it is a matter of privilege and honor to welcome all of you to this event of the 4th PK Mohan Oration in Neurology, organized by the Sri Chitra Alumni Association of Neurology and the Department of Neurology, Sri Chitra. The oration is to be delivered by Professor Ronald Petersen, Professor of Neurology of the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine, Rochester, US. As we have heard, he focuses his interest on cognition in normal aging, mild cognitive impairment, and dementia. Now, in the midst of this COVID pandemic, no matter whatever is said, these academic sessions are a reminder of the silver lining that is a harbinger of the good times ahead. I will not dwell much on Dr. PK Mohan, as Dr. Anup Ranjan Verma will be speaking on that subject concerned. But I should tell you that in the yonder days of 1989, when I joined SCT, Dr. PK Mohan and Dr. Tharagan were the stalwarts in the Department of Neurology at that time. I remember distinctly taking his permission to work on the only computer available in the campus in SCT Neurology. Those days, the expensive computer had, if you remember, had only memory as RAM, was working on diskettes. But yet, Dr. Mohan gave permission with a smile. And this attitude sums up his soft-spoken and friendly nature. He was a man of great integrity and gradually built up an excellent department as it exists today. He used to be in charge of the academic wing before the evolutionary advent of the deans and the associate deans in the institute. It is indeed a profound gesture of gratitude that the Sri Chitra alumni holds this oration in his memory. The memorial oration is on Alzheimer's, diagnosing Alzheimer's disease in the era of biomarkers. And the oration will be delivered by Professor Ronald Petersen, Professor of Neurology at the Mayo Clinic of Medicine, Rochester. Presently, he, as you have heard, is the director of Mayo's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the Mayo Clinic Study of Aging. I welcome you, sir, on behalf of the Sri Chitra Institute. Towards the fag end of life, all the organs have a physiological and progressive decline in function, with the brain being no exception. Understanding cognition and intelligence in the absolute and evolutionary sense is crucial to understand this late decline in function, as well as to understand Alzheimer's disease. As a cardiologist, I was interested in the evolutionary biology of the human heart and came to realize that we, the humans, do not perhaps have the best designed heart or the lungs or the matter of any organs as compared to other organisms, including reptiles, such as crocodiles. In fact, evolution itself is not progressive, as believed to be, but random. Now, the only exception apparently appears to be the brain, with superior cognition and intelligence that has transformed us to be the dominant species. Darwin in 1871 noted that this difference in mind between man and animals, now great as it is, he said that it is only a matter of degree and not of kind. I think we need to explore this hypothesis, whether the difference is a matter of quantum or quality. The study of human cognition has to be also placed in an evolutionary context. The species difference in cognition are likely related to changes in brain development, neuroanatomical reorganization and modifications at the molecular level, and not solely on the brain size or on the total number of neurons or the neuronal velocity. Of specific interest is the genetic basis, reflecting a global pattern of increased gene expression in the human brain compared to non-human primates, something that is not evident in the heart or the liver. And these genes are involved in synaptic transmission and plasticity, indicative of the idea that the human brain evolution is characterized by molecular modifications to increase the level of neuronal activity. Over a course of time, I think we will be able to uncover the evolutionary molecular secrets, and that has resulted in the evolution of the human brain. And only then will the secrets of cognition, intelligence, and dementia can be completely unraveled. At Sri Chitra, we have built a great department of neurology on the foundations laid by Professor PK Mohan. And it is my belief that all the subsections will evolve into departments with a personality of their own and with research in their own areas. Once again, I welcome all of you to this grand oration. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite Dr. Anup Ranjan Verma, alumnus of the Neurology Department and senior member of the Sri Chitra Alumni Association of Neurology, to share a few words commemorating Professor PK Mohan.
Honorable Director Sanjeev, Mrs. Mohan, Malika, Karthikeya and the family, friends and teachers. It is indeed the greatest honor that I've been asked to speak a few words at Dr. Mohan Sir's memorial. In our country's glorious tradition, the teacher is held a place above the gods. I remember vividly my DM entrance exam, the Viva, Dr. Mohan, that December 1988. I was struck by Dr. Mohan's grandeur. Over the years, I have realized that that was his intelligence, his quiet command, born of great scholarship, belying his simplicity. About Dr. Mohan and his astounding neurological skills and his sharp analytical mind. However, it is the personal that may lie in many unspoken stories. I ask your indulgence as I narrate a few that relate to me. When I joined in 1989, I had not anticipated the hopelessness I would feel, the vast sea of my ignorance, but also my complete loss in this new world of Malayalam. I came from Jaipur. Within 2 months, I was driven to tears, waiting on the 4th floor opposite Dr. Mohan's office to call it a day at Trivandrum. In this very chair, Dr. Mohan listened quietly and made light of my problems, taking the burden away. He quoted several examples of how language barriers had been crossed, southern states versus the north, the example of Chetan Trivedi, and so on and so forth. I stayed, and during my DM final exam 3 years later, Dr. Mohan himself told the external with pride that I would not need an interpreter. At the time of my part 1 in 1990, I fell severely ill, all alone in my flat, high temperature and completely flummoxed, totally at sea. Of course, I turned to Dr. Mohan, requesting that I drop my exam and return home. In a motherly fashion, he assumed quiet command, realizing how ill I was, and he took me personally to the Medical College Trivandrum professor's residence. His care, concern, love, compassion, more than the antibiotics, cured me on the double. Back on my feet, and thanks to Dr. Mohan, the part 1 was under my belt. However, simply another episode in Dr. Mohan's stride, whose exterior never revealed the depth of his concern, compassion, and feeling. However, my soul felt it deeply, and it remains seared ever since. Dr. Mohan taught by example, guided with love, and spoke only what was necessary, pure pearls of wisdom. In the classical sense, Dr. Mohan may not have been adorned enough. However, his adorations in the hearts of his students, his patients, colleagues, outdo the highest awards that humanity may hazard offer anyone. At the end of my course, my father came to accompany me back. We visited Dr. Mohan at his residence. They were both BHU alumni and shared a common heritage. My father was all admiration for Sir. The biological father lends the ignorant child to the teacher, the true parent, to sculpt the child into a man. Dr. Mohan was an ace sculptor of the lumps of clay that we were. His legacy is immortal. Whenever I wield the hammer or I teach my students, I'm lost in a reverie. It is not me, but Sir, through this body, through this mind, his own instrument, the that I wield this hammer or teach the student. I hope I could be a small fraction of what he was. What a great soul. It is so lovely to see his own two wonderful children, but even more so, his first child, the neurology department at Sri Chitra, at these dizzying heights. It is rare for souls like Dr. Mohan to grace this earth, and we were lucky to be touched by his divinity. Dr. Mohan gifted me this book with his blessings in 1992. Dr. Mohan was the first cognitive neurologist of India, most understated, my very inspiration. It is so very fitting that the guest speaker this evening is a pioneer from this field. Dr. Mohan's blessings have made me what I am. I owe him everything. These small stories reveal only a ray of the sun that Dr. Mohan is. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the delightful commemorative speech. May I now invite Dr. Ramshekhar N. Menon, Additional Professor of Neurology, in charge Cognition and Behavioral Neurology section, to kindly introduce our esteemed orator to the audience.
Good evening and very good morning to Professor Petersen. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Ronald C. Petersen to this august audience. Dr. Petersen received a PhD in experimental psychology from the University of Minnesota and graduated from Mayo Medical School in 1980. Prior to joining medical school, he had the unique distinction of serving as captain in the US Army, as well as a research psychologist under the division of the US Army Biomedical Research Wing. He completed an internship in medicine at Stanford University Medical Center and returned to the Mayo Clinic to complete a residency in neurology. This was followed by a fellowship in behavioral neurology at Harvard University Medical School in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Petersen joined the staff at the Mayo Clinic in 1986 and became a professor of neurology in 1996. And in 2000, he was named the Korakano Professor of Alzheimer's Disease Research, and these are positions he continues to hold. He was the recipient of the Mayo Clinic Distinguished Investigator Award in 2011. He has authored over 1,000 peer-reviewed articles on memory disorders, aging, and Alzheimer's disease. He has an astounding 130,000 plus citations and a Scopus index of 167. His professional highlights include a membership of the World Dementia Council from 2014 to present, chairmanship of the Advisory Council on Alzheimer's Disease Research, Care, and Services for the National Alzheimer's Project Act, Board of Directors of the Alzheimer's Association from 2008 onwards, membership of the National Advisory Council on Aging, National Institute of Aging between 2010 to 2013, and Board of Scientific Counselors of the National Institute of Aging between 2003 to 2008. Also, the chairmanship of the Medical and Scientific Advisory Council of Alzheimer's Association 2008 to 2014. Among his awards, these include the Henry Wisniewski Lifetime Achievement Award of the Alzheimer's Association in 2013, Zevan Kakaturian Award of the Alzheimer's Association in 2012, the prestigious Potamkin Prize for Research in PICS, Alzheimer's disease and related disorders of the American Academy of Neurology in 2005, and the MetLife Foundation Award for Medical Research in Alzheimer's disease 2004. Coming to the topic of his oration, Dr. Petersen, as you're aware, directs the Mayo Clinic Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and the Mayo Clinic Study of Aging, which is in fact a longitudinal prospective population-based study on 6,000 plus non-demented persons between 30 to 89 years of age in Olmsted County, Minnesota. In 1999, his group at the Mayo Clinic described subjects in their community aging study who had a memory concern beyond what was expected for age and who demonstrated. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Is there a problem in my reception?
You're audible, sir.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In 1999, Professor Petersen's group at the Mayo Clinic described subjects in their community aging study who had a memory concern beyond what was expected for age and who demonstrated a slight memory impairment, yet did not meet criteria for dementia. This paved way for developing the challenging, yet very conceptually relevant concept of the mild cognitive impairment. That is the clinical construct of mild cognitive impairment. Subsequently, we know that the classification scheme has broadened beyond memory and has progressed to executive dysfunction, language, and visuospatial domains. And we recognize that MCI could result from a wide variety of etiologies and not just Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Petersen and his colleagues evaluate cognitive changes in normal aging as well as in a variety of disorders involving impairment of cognition besides Alzheimer's disease, such as frontotemporal lobar degeneration and Lewy body dementia. His focus has been on biomarkers of disease processes, including neuroimaging and CSF biomarkers, cognitive and biomarker signals of early cognitive impairment, and development of therapies for cognitive impairment. He is actively involved in American Brain Foundation, which is aimed to inspire the next generation of neurologists to take up clinical work and research in neurological disorders such as dementia. He has trained several research fellows in behavioral neurology. And from the direct feedback I got from one of his students who works in an ancillary lab under Dr. Prashanthi Vemure at Mayo Clinic and who has been closely interacting with him, is that he is an extremely humble teacher and highly interactive as well as encouraging in his discussions and teaching sessions. And I myself was inspired to invite him for this prestigious oration, having listened to a few of his lectures in 2016 during a symposium in Bangalore. Dr. Petersen, we are privileged to welcome you to the 4th PK Mohan Oration. And we look forward to hearing from you on a topic which we are sure is very close to your heart and is extremely relevant to our country, as well as several low middle income countries across Asia and South America, which are facing an increasing burden of persons with dementia. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It is my privilege and honor to invite our esteemed orator, Dr. Ronald C. Petersen, Professor of Neurology, Korukinau Professor of Alzheimer's Disease Research, Mayo Clinic College of Medicine, and Director, Mayo Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, to kindly deliver the memorial oration.
Good evening. My name is Ron Petersen, and I am a professor of neurology at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And it is my distinct honor to present the Professor PK Mohan lecture this afternoon. I'd like to thank Professor Menon, Dr. Ajit Kumar for this distinct honor, as well as the Sri Chitra Trunal Institute of Medicine, Science, and Technology, and the Alumni Association as well for this invitation. This is an important time, I think, in Alzheimer's disease research, and I'd like to share with you some of my thoughts, at least, on making the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease currently in the era of biomarkers and where the field may be headed. Here are my disclosures, and I will mention a few of the drug studies that are underway right now and the discussion in the United States, at least with regard to approval of disease-modifying therapies. So I do consult for several of the drug companies, usually around drug design of studies, use of biomarkers, the topic of today's discussion. But most of our research is funded by the National Institute on Aging. So where I'd like to go today is discuss the historical approach to diagnosing Alzheimer's disease, discuss a new proposal that's on the table for diagnosing Alzheimer's disease, and then get into the role of the biomarkers in this overall picture. So what is a biomarker? I think we all know that it's a measure of brain pathology that can be obtained in the living person. Biomarkers are proxies for the specific pathological changes in the brain. So when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, we're talking about biomarkers that constitute neuroimaging markers or cerebrospinal fluid markers. Here's the outline of what I'd like to discuss this evening. Where have we been? How did we get to this point in time? What is the biological underpinning for the current proposals for diagnosing Alzheimer's disease? Where do biomarkers come in? Again, say a couple words about new therapies, and then wrap up with where I feel the biomarkers are in the larger picture of Alzheimer's disease. So where have we been? Certainly when I started practice many decades ago, a person was either cognitively normal or had dementia. And we got better over the years at making the dementia diagnosis a little earlier in the spectrum, but basically it was normal or dementia. Over the years, we've come to appreciate this sort of intermediate stage of cognitive impairment called mild cognitive impairment. And as you know, this is the condition where somebody is experiencing subtle cognitive changes in performance, but they are subtle, and the person's functional abilities are largely preserved, such that this is really an intermediate stage between the very early preclinical features of Alzheimer's disease, where people are cognitively normal, the dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, and MCI is somewhere in the middle. But we realize this is a continuum, and by no means are there hard demarcations between normal, MCI, and dementia. The paper that really drove the field for literally decades was this NIN-CDS-ADRDA criteria paper in 1984 by Guy McCann and colleagues that outlined Alzheimer's disease as a clinical pathological entity. And by that, they meant that a person typically had the common features of forgetfulness, progressing beyond what we would expect for aging, and yet other cognitive domains were becoming involved gradually over time. And as it impacted the person's daily function, it then constituted dementia. At that point in time, we did the rule out exercise. That is, we looked to make sure the person didn't have a brain tumor, didn't have a thalamic stroke, didn't have normal pressure hydrocephalus. And if we did not find those rule out entities, we concluded this is probable Alzheimer's disease. We couldn't say definite Alzheimer's disease until the person passed away, had an autopsy, and we saw plaques and tangles. When we saw plaques and tangles, we said, this is definite Alzheimer's disease. And that really carried the field for many decades, 1984. In 2011, however, the National Institute on Aging and the Alzheimer's Association convened several committees to look at the field and say, look, we've obtained a lot of information over the years on biomarkers. Can't we incorporate these biomarkers into our diagnostic criteria? So in 2011, the preclinical state, MCI state, and dementia state clinical syndromes were coupled with biomarkers for amyloid and neurodegeneration, and various criteria were developed saying that this could be possibly due to Alzheimer's disease, probably or definitely due to Alzheimer's disease, based on the combination of the clinical features and the biomarker profile. But still, at that point, it was a clinical pathologic diagnosis. In 2018, another committee was convened by the NIA and the Alzheimer's Association, and they proposed that we look at Alzheimer's disease from a purely biological perspective, meaning that the disease is defined by the presence of amyloid and tau, irrespective of the clinical presentation. This is quite a departure from what we had previously used with regard to the clinical pathologic correlations. So the NIA Alzheimer's Association Research Framework then proposed a different approach to the disease. It was based, however, on this so-called ATN framework, amyloid, tau, neurodegeneration. My colleague, Dr. Cliff Jack, led many of these efforts and really said, let's put Alzheimer's disease on the same basis as many other medical disorders. So if you have a positive prostate biopsy for cancer, you have prostate cancer. If you have a positive breast biopsy for breast cancer, you have breast cancer, irrespective of what the clinical state is. And the committee said, let's put Alzheimer's disease on this same kind of framework. So the ATN framework then proposed that A be defined by the presence of amyloid plaques, which could be detected by CSF. A beta 42 levels were low or better, and A beta 42 to 40 ratio was low, or it could be detected by amyloid PET. More recently, and we'll see a little data later, maybe plasma for amyloid could make a difference in the diagnostic criteria. What about the T? The T refers to aggregated tau, which could be, again, detected in the CSF by high phosphorylated tau, p-tau levels, positive tau PET scan, possibly plasma p-tau, maybe p-tau 181, 217, 231, a variety of these p-tau isoforms. So these two features define the disease, A and T. The N then refers to neuronal injury or neurodegeneration. How far down the road is the person on the amyloid tau spectrum if they have neuronal injury? And this can be detected by structural MRI, FDG PET, or in the CSF. Now we'd be looking at total tau, but more recently, NFL, either in the CSF or NFL in the plasma, have become candidates for neurodegeneration. But more recently, should this be expanded? Should we consider vascular consideration? Should we consider inflammation, alpha-synuclein, TDP-43? So should the ATN framework be expanded to ATN-V or ATN-VX with other entities added to the overall grouping? So these are considerations for the future. Nothing has been adopted thus far, but these are active areas of investigation. But getting back to the 2018 research framework then, the objective of the exercise was to update the scheme for defining and staging the disease. But this is still a research entity and has not percolated into the clinic as of yet. Again, Alzheimer's disease now is defined by its pathologic characteristics, either by postmortem examination of the brain or by biomarkers. But symptoms, clinical state, are not part of the disease, and this constitutes a major shift in thinking if it in fact is adopted. So in the ATN framework then, amyloid could be positive or negative, tau could be positive or negative, neurodegeneration could be positive or negative. Now there's a whole host of research questions that are involved in what's positive and what's negative. What are the thresholds? How do you define that? Let's not get into that right now. Let's take that as it can be plus or minus. If you take ATNN plus minus, then you would get 8 combinations, and you can see how they might play out with the various positive and negative combinations. Those in the middle then constitute the Alzheimer's continuum if A is positive. Regardless of TNN, if A is positive, the person is on the Alzheimer's continuum. But the person isn't characterized as having Alzheimer's disease unless both A and T are positive. N could be plus or minus. But if A and T are positive, the person has Alzheimer's disease. So this sets a framework then for the role of the biomarkers in this whole constellation. What are we talking about with biomarkers? Well, again, not everybody has access to all these different entities, but if we're talking about biomarkers in the neuroimaging scheme, amyloid imaging can be characterized on PET scans. These are axial cuts of PET scans with the person being cognitively normal. The yellow-green here in this left-hand scan refers to non-specific white matter binding. Here in the amnestic MCI person, we see some of this redness here anteriorly in the posterior cingulate region, in the precuneus region, that says this person, in fact, has amyloid in the brain. And over here at the AD dementia stage, we see florid amyloid deposition characterized by the red. But this is PIB refers to Pittsburgh compound B, which is the tracer that we've been using at Mayo for many, many years. And it means that this is what it looks like ideally. But when you go out into the community, as we do in at Mayo in Rochester, Minnesota, we find, excuse me, let me go back here. We find all combinations. So here's a cognitively normal person with a negative amyloid PET scan. Here's a cognitively normal person with a positive amyloid PET scan. Amnestic MCI, negative amyloid, positive amyloid. So we see all combinations, and the million-dollar question then becomes, what happens to this person down here who's cognitively normal but has a positive amyloid scan? Similarly, the amnestic MCI person with a positive amyloid scan, is that person going to progress on to the dementia stage? Probably, but when? Today, tomorrow, 2 years, 5 years, 8 years, or ever in this person's lifetime? These are questions that we don't have the answers to at present, but are vitally important when you're using these biomarkers in a clinical setting. Here's a depiction now of the amyloid deposition in a cognitively normal person versus AD dementia. To the extent we see the redness then, this is the distribution of amyloid in the brain. We can see it's rather wide, sparing the motor and sensory strips and the occipital cortex, but otherwise it's frontal, parietal, and temporal. So this is amyloid imaging. What about tau imaging? Here are coronal PET scans showing a cognitively normal person, non-specific binding here in the basal ganglia, but that's negative. But here in the person with Alzheimer's disease dementia, we see lateral temporal, inferior temporal positivity depicted again by the redness on the scans. And if we look now at the distribution of the tau tracer in cognitively normal versus individuals with AD dementia, it's somewhat similar to amyloid, but not really. There's more heavy deposition in certain regions in the parietal temporal regions, which is the pattern we see. And as we know, tau tends to be more closely correlated with clinical symptoms. So these are the two neuroimaging defining features of Alzheimer's disease. Now, as we stage the disease progression, we can look at neurodegeneration either on MRI or FDG PET. So MRI atrophy patterns now, here are some coronal MR scans that you've seen many times over. And this is a control individual with no significant atrophy at age 70. Here's a person with mild cognitive impairment, some subtle, mild atrophy here in the hippocampal, medial temporal lobe regions, and the person with dementia has a great deal of atrophy focused in the medial temporal lobe, but temporally, parietally as well. So there's more widespread atrophy in the person with AD dementia. If you look now at cortical thickness, here we see outlined in red areas of cortical thinning for both on the sagittal view, the coronal view, the axial view. You can see that they tend to be more temporally oriented, and this characterizes the spread actually of tau in the disease as well, and goes along with the clinical picture of evolving Alzheimer's disease. And here is a depiction of the thinning pattern, the cortical thinning pattern in Alzheimer's disease dementia versus individuals with who are cognitively normal. So again, you can see that the distribution is somewhat different than what we've seen with both amyloid and tau. And finally, now we turn to functional imaging with FDG PET. And on the bottom here, we can see sagittal views of individuals where the yellow, green, and red indicate areas of hypometabolism, decreased metabolism. And this is the pattern we see in Alzheimer's disease. It's not definitive, it's a staging instrument. And over here, we can put numbers on it with regard to what we would expect for age-matched controls in individuals with regard to hypometabolism. And here is the pattern now of hypometabolism that we see in evolving Alzheimer's disease dementia compared to cognitively normal individuals. So these imaging studies then, while rather sophisticated and rather expensive, do give us a good overall picture of what's happening in people who are developing Alzheimer's disease, dementia. Now, I mentioned that you can stage the disease, the N feature of the disease, by looking at MRI, FDG, PET, perhaps some fluid biomarkers, but you can also stage the disease clinically. So the syndromes that you and I use in the clinic on a day-to-day basis are cognitively unimpaired, mild cognitive impairment, or dementia. In the 2018 proposal for the AD framework, they also proposed a 6-stage scheme that looks at the subtle features of cognitive progression even before the dementia stage. So 1 and 2 are cognitively unimpaired, but stage 2 refers to people who are experiencing a change in their cognitive function, even in the normal stage. Stage 3 then is basically mild cognitive impairment. 4, 5, and 6 are mild, moderate, severe stages of dementia. Well, imaging is nice, but it's not available everywhere. What about fluid biomarkers? Here you can look at CSF, you can look at plasma. From a CSF perspective, these hundreds of studies have been done on CSF, A beta, and tau, various ratios, and looking at the correlation here between florbetapir PET on the x-axis and CSF A beta 42 on the y-axis. You see a nice correlation in general between normal people up here who have low florbetapir, high CSF A beta 42, and down here we have the likely Alzheimer's disease spectrum of elevated PET scan amyloid levels and decreased A beta 42 levels. These two correspond to likely diagnoses of Alzheimer's disease versus normal. There are some off-diagonal cases here that are very interesting and worth discussing at a later point in time. At Mayo, we've done a study in the community looking at 874 individuals on whom we have CSF. Most of them are cognitively unimpaired, some MCI and some AD dementia. And using these data, we've come up with certain cut scores for defining what constitutes a profile that looks like Alzheimer's disease. And when you use various measures of comparing normal and abnormal, comparing them with other international studies, they all fall in the same range, suggesting that really CSF measures are becoming much more standardized around the world. And when you start looking at cut points now of what's normal and abnormal with A beta 42, total tau, p-tau, or other types of ratios, depending different kinds of comparisons of what constitutes normal, what constitutes impaired, we've come up with a set of cut points for A beta 42, total tau, and p-tau, and most importantly, the p-tau to A beta 42 ratio that constitutes a positive predictive agreement of 92%, a negative predictive agreement of 92%. So we're fairly comfortable that in fact CSF, using this particular platform for diagnostic entities, this was the Roche platform actually, and it performs pretty well, giving us a confident feeling that in the CSF we can find a pattern that is quite consistent with underlying Alzheimer's disease. But what about plasma? And here's what might be relevant for you, certainly in India, as the plasma measures are evolving. The practical reality of biomarkers for AD are that they're costly and they may not be available. So you may not be able to do PET scans. You may not be able to do CSF on a widespread basis. But the plasma markers now are suggesting that we might be able to gain a good deal of information, both reliably and validly, in the plasma. So a prominent paper was published last summer, actually, by the Biofinder group in Sweden, showing that plasma phospho-tau 217 was actually quite good when you correlated it with tau PET on the one hand or amyloid PET on the other hand, it correlated quite well and gave AUCs for tau PET of 0.93, for amyloid PET, AUC of 0.87. So really did quite well with correlating with more of the standard biomarker features obtained through neuroimaging. Look, using dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease, the Diane study out of Washington University in St. Louis looked at a variety of tau markers as well, and looked at p-tau 217, p-tau 181, p-tau 205, and each of these different isoforms of p-tau may give you different information for the evolving Alzheimer's disease process over time. And as you can see, it precedes total tau and precedes NFL along, and the development of neurofibrillary tangles in autopsy. Now, we've been dealing, of course, a lot with mild cognitive impairment. Again, the Biofinder group in Sweden has done some nice work looking at, can we predict who's going to progress from mild cognitive impairment to dementia based on a variety of plasma biomarker combinations? And while they looked at a lot of different features, they looked at both the Biofinder group in Sweden and the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative. As you know, this North American study looking at simulating clinical trials, and showed that, in fact, if you look at the plasma markers, they are quite good at predicting those individuals who have MCI who might be likely to progress to dementia sooner than later. And this has resulted in, among other things, on the bottom of this slide here, the Biofinder Brain app, which is available, and again, for research purposes, education, research purposes, not clinical practice, but predicting progression from MCI to dementia based on a model that involves the mini-mental, age, sex, plasma p-tau 181, and neurofilament light. Also, individuals at Washington University in St. Louis have developed a test for amyloid probability score, looking at the ratio of A beta 42 to 40 using mass spec, age, plus ApoE, and developing a likelihood that the probability on their test that the person would have an amyloid positive PET scan was quite high. Again, AUCs in the 0.90, 0.91, 0.92 range. So I think the bottom line is that these plasma markers may be good enough to tell us who is on the Alzheimer's spectrum. So what? I mean, if we diagnose Alzheimer's disease early, if we can pick it up with these biomarkers, that's great. We can counsel people, all that's great. But so what? Well, as you know, in the field, there's been a good deal of work recently on some of the disease-modifying therapies. And in particular, let me say a couple words about aducanumab from Biogen and donanemab from Eli Lilly, because these have been hot topics around the world, but particularly in the US in the last year. The thinking, of course, is that the amyloid pathway and its development from the monomeric stage to the oligomeric stage, protofibrils, fibrils, amyloid plaques, several of these antibodies, now these monoclonal antibodies, can intervene on this pathway at different points. And there's a good deal of discussion, good deal of controversy as to which one is most effective, where do you intervene, which one's better, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that still needs to be sorted out. But many people think that the oligomeric species are in fact the toxic substances with regard to the amyloid processing pathway. Busy slide, don't worry about it, except that I'm trying, this is a slide from Biogen showing that their drug aducanumab on the left-hand side, the A-side drug BAN2401, now called lecanemab, the Roche compounds, gantenerumab, crenezumab, the Lilly compounds that are out there, and the other bapineuzumab and other Lilly compounds, all intervene at different points on this amyloid pathway and are presumed to have different efficacy depending on their particular point. Let's look at the aducanumab data. Biogen conducted 2 identically designed, but not executed, phase 3 trials using aducanumab to treat MCI or mild dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. But as you know, the trials were stopped in 2019 due to futility. The futility analyses were performed on data through December of 2018. But in fact, the trials weren't stopped until March of 2019. And over the ensuing 3 months, additional data were collected such that the data in the more complete data set in March of 2019 suggested that one of the 2 trials was positive and one was negative. The FDA in the United States agreed to accept these data for analyses. And in June of this year, the FDA granted accelerated approval for aducanumab. Accelerated approval means that they thought that the drugs were in fact effective at lowering the amyloid plaque level in the brain, but the clinical impact of that was not demonstrated. So the accelerated approval said, we'll approve it for a period of time based on the amyloid lowering properties, but it's incumbent upon the company then to demonstrate that this has clinical efficacy. That's what the accelerated approval, and of course the firestorm, if you will, in the US on this has arisen with regard to, yeah, but one trial was positive, one trial was negative, why did you approve it? Again, the FDA approved it on the basis of the ability to lower amyloid, not the clinical efficacy. So the aducanumab trials then were called EMERGE and ENGAGE. EMERGE was the positive trial, ENGAGE was the negative trial. 2 identically designed trials, 3,000 people enrolled around the world. Again, MCI or early dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. Everybody had to be amyloid positive. So looking at the positive study then, what they demonstrated was that at the high dose in the EMERGE, the positive trial, the CDR sum of the boxes, the rate of change was slowed by at 0.39, sum of the boxes, 22% slowing. The MMSE demonstrated an 18% slowing. The ADAS-Cog instrument, a 27% slowing, and the ADCS-ADL scale, activities of daily living scale at the MCI range, showed a 40% slowing. And in fact, there was another measure, a tertiary measure of the NPI-Q, which again was positive and showed slowing in the proper direction. So based on this, the Biogen folks thought that this was sufficient evidence to constitute efficacy of this drug. Again, the other study did not corroborate these data. So here's what the CDR sum of the boxes, again, a higher score is worsening. So the purple line there in the bottom shows that the high dose aducanumab significantly reduced the rate of change of slowing of the CDR sum of the boxes. Here, the mini mental scores were relatively higher in the treated group. The ADAS-Cog, again, a high score is bad. So the treated group, the high dose group, had a lessening of the rate of change. And the MCI ADL scale, again, here, the high dose group showed lessening of the decline in the ADL scale. So the confirmatory data on the biomarker side was that here at high dose, if we started with a baseline level of amyloid on the PET scans, that the high dose group reduced more amyloid, lowered the amyloid levels in the brain at week 78, intermediate, and the placebo remained stable. So putting these data together, then one would infer, if you just saw this study, that in fact it was effective. But the identically designed study, the ENGAGE trial, did not support those. I won't go through detail here, but basically the company then did some post hoc analyses on the ENGAGE trial and suggested that we have an explanation for why this trial failed. And they looked at some subgroups having to do with when some protocol amendments were made in the study and all that. It's plausible, but it's a post hoc analysis. And so again, the detractors are saying, look, you have one positive trial, you have one negative trial. It's a toss-up. Why would you approve it? The FDA said, we're not approving it on clinical efficacy. We're approving it on its basis of the fundamental finding that it lowers amyloid in the brain. Amyloid is a fundamental feature of Alzheimer's disease. And now it's incumbent upon you to demonstrate that this has clinical efficacy. Now, they have some tau PET data that are suggestive, but a small subgroup of people had tau scanning. Here's what you would expect to see in a normal coronal cut of a PET scan, healthy person, a person like we saw earlier who has a tau PET positivity in the lateral and inferior medial temporal lobe. So this is what you would expect to find in Alzheimer's disease. What they suggested happened in the eMERGE trial was that at baseline, you have this amount of tau. Follow-up, you have increasing amounts of tau. Both of these three individuals, there's increasing amount of tau, particularly in the inferior and the lateral temporal lobe. In the aducanumab treated subjects, you saw perhaps a lessening of the tau. Here's baseline, here's follow-up, here's baseline, here's follow-up. So again, small groups, but it suggested that in fact, by lowering the amyloid levels, you impacted the subsequent tau accumulation in the brain as well. Well, what about the safety results? These are not benign treatments. In fact, they can result in ARIA, amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, either microedema or microhemorrhages. And in fact, we saw in both trials that in fact, there was probably a 2.2% in the placebo, 34% in the high dose eMERGE, 3%, 35% in ARIA-E. Similarly, in ARIA-H, the hemorrhage, 7% to 19%, 6% to 18%. So no doubt there are the development of amyloid imaging abnormalities, either edema or hemorrhage. The trial suggested that perhaps these can be dosed through. You recognize them with safety monitoring on MRI. You adjust the dose or stop the drug. You can get through it. Relatively few people were symptomatic with it. If they became symptomatic, they stopped the drug. So it's not a benign treatment. It does lower amyloid, but the clinical efficacy, I think, remains to be seen. So the other drug that has received attention recently is the donanemab trial from Eli Lilly. Same kind of thing, a monoclonal antibody intended to remove amyloid from the brain. And here we see the primary outcome in this phase 2 trial of donanemab was the iADRS, which is a composite score of the ADAS-Cog and an MCI-ADL scale. And it showed here that the donanemab group declined less rapidly than the placebo group. The CDR, sum of the boxes, ADAS-Cog in the upper right, and IADL score here in the MMSE, that donanemab appeared to slow the rates of progression in these particular measures. If you put them together, looking at two different ways to analyze the data, either MMRM or a Bayesian analysis, the Bayesian analysis was a bit more impressive. The MMRM was less, but the suggestion was there that the donanemab group outperformed the placebo group. And if you look now at, did it do what it was supposed to do biologically? It appeared so. So here you're looking at the mean change from baseline in amyloid plaque levels. Again, like the aducanumab data, donanemab did what it was supposed to do biologically. So However, when you looked at fluorotaucipir, the PET, the tau PET, we did not see a significant change there. So the disease modifying therapy data, the data are suggestive of a disease modifying benefit of monoclonal antibody treatments against amyloid. Other compounds are under development or emerging. The various trials are out there. And you can see now that the biomarkers are critically important in the design of these trials, the execution of these trials, and consequently, the whole biomarker field in Alzheimer's disease really takes on importance because it not only will define who is eligible for these studies, but also how are we going to measure the efficacy of the therapies. So let me finish then by saying, is Alzheimer's disease the end of the game with regard to cognitive changes in aging? At the end of the day, I think it's an important component of what we're talking about. So if you look at Alzheimer's disease and the clinical spectrum, cognitively normal, MCI, dementia, clinical spectrum, you have amyloid beta, A beta, important element. You have tau contributing to cognitive decline. But you also have other features, alpha-synuclein. You have TDP-43 that may or may not produce hippocampal sclerosis, late disease. You have vascular disease that is virtually present in everybody as they age. And then you have the new entity of CSF dynamics. Won't go into that, but CSF dynamics may very well be playing a role as a component. And then I'm sure there are other entities that we are yet to discover that impact how a person ages and with respect to cognitive function. So let me then take a look at this composite saying this is Alzheimer's disease, but Alzheimer's disease is just a component of the total picture. So if we look at all these elements now, what we're trying to do is develop biomarkers for each of these various components. We've got them. We talked a lot about plasma. We talked about PET. We talked about CSF for amyloid and tau. People are working on many of these other entities, either fluid biomarkers or imaging biomarkers for all of them. Why are we doing that? Because at the end of the day, we'd like to think that we can develop therapies for each of these components. And ultimately, it's probably going to take combination therapy to treat cognitive changes in aging. Alzheimer's disease is an important component, but it's probably just a component. And we will need to develop not only biomarkers for these, but also treatments for these individual components, such that we'll be using combination therapy like we do with hypertension, like we do with cancers, like we do with HIV/AIDS. We use combination therapies to treat these complex diseases. And that's where we're headed with Alzheimer's disease. So I think this NIAA framework is feasible. It certainly is heuristic with regard to generating new research. The role of the biomarkers, and particularly plasma biomarkers, are becoming increasingly important. However, I'm a clinician. I think clinical skills are still vital in this whole process. We have to diagnose our patients and explain to our patients the role of these biomarkers, what they mean in conjunction with our clinical assessment. But remember, multiple co-pathologies are common, the rule for the day, not the exception. So we as a field certainly have a lot of work to do. It's an exciting time to be involved in Alzheimer's disease research. And I think that your contributions to the field are equally important. And I think when we put all these plasma biomarkers in conjunction with our clinical spectrum, I think we will be able to help our patients ultimately. I'd like to thank my colleagues here who have been contributing to the data that we've generated, certainly at the at the Mayo Clinic on Alzheimer's disease research. Prashanti Vermuri there is one of our colleagues in Rochester who's been instrumental with regard to a lot of the neuroimaging work, and we appreciate her contributions. And I'd like to thank you again for the honor of presenting this prestigious lecture, and I look forward to a discussion of several of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for the lucid account of AD biomarkers. On behalf of our institute and the Sri Chitra Alumni Association of Neurology, we would like to felicitate Professor Ronald Petersen by awarding him a plaque as a token of our gratitude.
Thank you so much for this honor. It's a beautiful plaque, and I look forward to receiving it. This is truly an honor for me, and I want to thank all of you for this prestigious moment. And I'm particularly honored and delighted to have any kinds of subsequent conversations with you, discuss these issues going forward, and we certainly would entertain several of you to come and visit with us and spend time to discuss these issues and then translate the work that we're doing to your environment. And I think the potential role of plasma markers in Alzheimer's disease and cognition and aging certainly could be expanded to India as well. So again, I hope this just furthers some of our collaborations, and I want to thank everybody again for this wonderful honor.
Thank you, sir. It was an honor indeed. Now, may I kindly invite Dr. P.N. Shailaja, Professor of Neurology, in charge of Comprehensive Stroke Care Program, and the Secretary of the Sri Chitra Alumni Association of Neurology, to present the vote of thanks.
Respected Director, Dr. Ajit Kumar, Orator of the Day, Dr. Petersen, Professor of Neurology, Mayo Clinic, Rochester, Dr. Sanjeev Thomas, Professor and Head of Neurology and the President of the Neurology Alumni Association, and Dr. Anup Ranjan, who is the Senior Member of the SCAN, distinguished people who have who are attending this, neurology alumni, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This is in fact a memorable day for the Department of Neurology and also for all the alumni of neurology to have this fourth Dr. PK Mohan Oration today. This is oration which is kept in memory of Dr. PK Mohan. Dr. PK Mohan, as Dr. Anup Verma has already mentioned, is always remembered by his students and also his colleagues with the deepest respect and also with affection for his inspiring lessons and his contribution to the Department of Neurology. And this oration is a mark of our respect towards him. Our director, Dr. Ajit Kumar, has been very supportive and also has helped us, and also for his timely help in organizing this event. And thank you, sir, for giving the presidential address for this event. And on behalf of SCAN and also on behalf of the Department of Neurology, I would like to thank you, sir, for being here for this event. We have a great orator here today. And in fact, we are lucky to have Dr. Petersen, who has been involved in the global burden reduction of the dementia and who was the architect of the clinical construct of MCI. And today we heard the phenomenal lifetime work of him on MCI and the biomarkers. It's a great privilege and honor to listen to you today. And it was indeed a memorable oration. On behalf of the Department of Neurology and also on behalf of the SCAN, I would like to thank you and express our gratitude for this memorable event, and also to thank you for being here at 5:30 a.m. in the morning at Rochester, Minnesota. Thank you. I would also like to thank Dr. Sanjeev Thomas, who is the head of the Department of Neurology, and Dr. Anup Verma, who are the senior members and who are the pillars of starting this SCAN association and for starting this oration back in 2014. I would also like to thank all my colleagues, all the alumni who has joined us for this meeting, and all those who have come from different parts of India who have joined through YouTube and also through this link. And a big thanks to Mr. Sadish and Ms. Lilita, who has provided the very smooth virtual platform for us to make this event a grand success. Thanks to all and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. It is now time to conclude the function. Once again, I thank all our esteemed dignitaries and guests for joining us for this auspicious function. Thank you and have a pleasant day.